Ethan Walker grabbed the man by the collar, lifted him off the ground with one hand, and said through clenched teeth, "Say that word about her one more time. I dare you." The whole town of Red Hollow went dead silent, because the man Ethan was holding had just called Amelia Carter a beast. And nobody, not one single soul in that crowd, expected the strongest rancher in Wyoming territory to choose her side. This is the story of a woman everyone feared and the man who refused to stop seeing her. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. 2. The morning Ethan Walker rode into Red Hollow, the temperature was sitting somewhere below zero, and the wind was mean enough to cut through wool like it wasn't there. He didn't ride in slow. He didn't take in the scenery. He rode hard the way a man rides when he's been too many hours in the saddle and his body is done arguing with him about it. His horse, a brown quarter horse named Buck, was breathing heavy and had earned every bit of the rest that was coming to him. Ethan pulled up in front of the general store, tied Buck to the post, and stepped inside without a word to anyone. He needed 2 things: flour and ammunition. Simple enough. He'd be back on the road to his ranch by noon. That was the plan. Plans, as Ethan had learned a long time ago, had a way of falling apart. The store was warm and smelled like tobacco and sawdust, and something faintly sweet, maybe dried apples in a barrel near the back wall. There were 4 or 5 people inside, and they were all talking. Not to each other. They were talking about someone. Ethan didn't pay attention at first. He moved to the counter, nodded at the shopkeeper, a thin man named Gerald, who wore the same suspicious expression on his face, no matter what day of the week it was, and said, "Flour, 2 sacks, and .44 shells." Gerald nodded, but didn't move to fill the order right away. He was too busy watching something through the front window. Ethan followed his gaze. Across the street, a woman was walking alone. She was carrying a basket in the crook of one arm, moving with her head slightly down, like she'd spent years practicing how to take up as little space as possible. She wore a coat that was practical, but worn, and her hair was tied back under a hat that had seen better days. That was all Ethan noticed at first. Then he noticed the crowd. There were maybe a dozen people on the boardwalk across the street, and almost all of them had stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Not politely. Not the way you watch a stranger out of idle curiosity. They watched her the way people watch something they've already decided they don't like. 2 women near a dress shop doorway leaned toward each other. Ethan couldn't hear what they said, but he could see their expressions, the pressed lips, the quick flicker of disgust. A man with a thick beard standing outside the barber shop crossed his arms and made a point of stepping to the far edge of the boardwalk as the woman passed, as if proximity itself was a danger. 3 boys, young maybe 12 or 13, were watching from the corner. One of them said something to the others, and they all laughed. The sound carried. The woman kept walking. She didn't look up. She didn't respond. But her grip on that basket tightened. Ethan saw it. He saw the way her knuckles shifted under her gloves. She knew they were watching. She'd been doing this same walk, through the same gauntlet long enough that she'd learned how to move through it without stopping, without reacting. Like a person who had gotten very good at surviving things that should have broken them. "Who is that?" Ethan asked. Gerald finally started pulling flour sacks from the shelf. He answered without looking up. "That's Amelia Carter. She live here. Edge of town, little place out past the creek." Gerald set the flour on the counter and started counting out shells. "Been here about 4 years. Keeps to herself mostly. Why is everyone staring at her like that?" Gerald finally looked at him. There was something in his expression that Ethan couldn't quite read. Not cruelty exactly, but something close to resignation, like he'd asked himself that same question once and given up on the answer. "People in this town," Gerald said carefully, "have certain ideas about her." "What kind of ideas?" Gerald didn't answer that directly. He just said, "She's got a scar, left side of her face. Bad one. People see it, and they make up their minds." Ethan looked back through the window. The woman Amelia had stopped at the far end of the street in front of what looked like a feed shop. She was talking to the man inside through the open door. Even from here, Ethan could see the man shaking his head, saying no to something. She pulled back, adjusted the basket on her arm, and turned to leave. "She have family here?" Ethan asked. "No." "Friends?" Gerald paused. "Not that I've seen." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He picked up his flour and his shells, paid what he owed, and started for the door. He told himself he was going back to Buck. Going back to the road. Going home. He told himself that for about 4 steps. Then he heard it. A man's voice, loud and carrying, cutting through the cold air with the kind of ease that comes from someone who's never been told to be quiet. "There she goes. Lord Almighty. Don't let her get too close, or she'll put a hex on you." Laughter. Several people. Ethan stopped walking. "You know what they say about her." More laughter. Then the voice dropped, not low enough, never low enough when someone wants to be heard while pretending they don't. "Nothing but a beast walking around in a woman's coat." Ethan turned around. The man who'd said it was standing near the entrance to the saloon, wide-shouldered, red-faced. The kind of man who laughed too loud and stood too close. He was grinning at his audience of 3, pleased with himself. Amelia had heard it. Ethan knew she'd heard it because of what she did, which was nothing. Not a flinch, not a pause. She just kept walking her chin, dropping another inch, her steps going just a little faster. And something about that. The practiced way she absorbed it, the fact that she'd had to practice absorbing it, hit Ethan somewhere behind his ribs. He set down his flour sacks on the nearest barrel. He crossed the street. The man by the saloon saw him coming. His grin didn't disappear right away. It took a moment to register that Ethan wasn't stopping, wasn't slowing down, and was considerably larger than he'd initially estimated. Ethan stopped 2 feet in front of him. "What did you just call her?" The man blinked. "I didn't." "I heard you." Ethan's voice was very calm. That was something people who knew him understood about Ethan Walker. He got quieter when he got angrier, not louder. "I heard every word. What did you just call that woman?" The saloon door was behind the man. His 3 companions had taken a subtle step backward. The grin on his face had curdled into something defensive. "It was just a joke," the man said. "Say it again," Ethan said. "Whatever you said. Say it again right now, so everybody on this street can hear you say it directly." The man said nothing. "That's what I thought." Ethan looked at him for another long moment, long enough to make the man look away first, and then turned and walked away. He didn't walk after Amelia. He went back to Buck, picked up his flour and his shells, and loaded them into his saddlebag. But he didn't ride out. He stood there with one hand on the saddle horn and thought about the way that woman's knuckles had shifted under her gloves. Thought about the fact that she hadn't looked surprised. Not one bit surprised. Which meant it wasn't the first time. Which meant it happened all the time. He found her at the far end of the street about 15 minutes later, standing outside the post office reading something she'd apparently just picked up, a letter maybe, or a notice. She was reading it with her back partly turned to the street, and Ethan understood without being told that she'd positioned herself that way deliberately. Less exposure, fewer angles for people to stare at. He stopped a few feet away. "Ma'am." She turned, and he got his first real look at her face. The scar ran from just below her left eye down across her cheek and jaw. Not ragged, but permanent. The kind that had healed a long time ago and would never fade further. It was significant. It changed the landscape of her face in a way that people noticed immediately. Ethan noticed it. And then he noticed everything else. Dark eyes that were sharp and watchful. A jawline set with the kind of steadiness that comes not from stubbornness, but from long practice, holding yourself together. She wasn't young middle 30s maybe, but there was nothing soft or defeated about her. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they're calculating, measuring up before deciding whether to move toward it or away from it. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was quieter than he expected but steady. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said. "I have a ranch about 9 miles north of here, the Rafter W." She waited. "I overheard what that man said to you back there." Something shifted in her eyes. "I didn't ask for anyone's help." "I know. I didn't ask your permission before I said something to him, and I'm sorry for that. That was your situation to handle, not mine." She looked at him. Really looked the way someone does when they're trying to figure out the angle. "Why did you?" she asked. "Because what he said was wrong," Ethan said. "That's all." She was quiet for a moment. "People say things like that here all the time." "I know. Gerald told me." "Gerald talks too much." "Gerald talks exactly the right amount," Ethan said, and something in his tone, some small dry humor, made the corner of her mouth twitch. Just barely. Barely enough to count. But he counted it. "What do you want, Mr. Walker?" she asked. "I need someone who can help me keep books at the ranch," he said. "Track inventory supplies, that kind of thing. I'm terrible at it. My foreman is worse. We lost a full winter's worth of supplies last year because neither one of us thought to count what we actually had before ordering." She studied him. "You rode into town for flour and ammunition. You saw a woman being treated poorly. Now you're offering her a job." She said it flatly, like she was reading the facts back to him so he could hear how they sounded. "Mr. Walker, I've had people offer me things before. There's always something attached." "There's a wage attached," he said. "That's all. People in this town won't like it. They already don't like me. I'm not particularly worried about adding to the list." Another pause. She looked down at whatever she'd been reading, then folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "I'll think about it," she said. She turned and walked away. Ethan watched her go. He noticed she didn't look back. He also noticed that her shoulders, which had been slightly curved in, pulled back a little straighter once she was moving, like something had shifted, even slightly, even just for a moment. He went and untied Buck. He rode home, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the 9-mile ride didn't feel as empty as it usually did. 3 days later, she came to the ranch. Ethan was out near the barn when he heard Buck whinny and looked up to see a woman on a plain gray horse coming up the lane. He stood up straight and shielded his eyes against the winter glare, and it took him a moment to recognize her because she was sitting differently than she'd been standing in town, upright, easy in the saddle, comfortable with the animal under her. Like this was where she actually lived, not the town. His foreman, a lean man in his 50s named Dale Cutler, came around from behind the barn and stopped when he saw her. Ethan heard him mutter something under his breath. "Dale," Ethan said. Dale went quiet. Amelia rode up, stopped and looked at Ethan with those same measuring eyes. "I thought about it," she said. "And I'll try it for 2 weeks. If it works, we can discuss more permanent terms. If it doesn't..." She left that part open. 2 weeks. Ethan agreed. "That's fair." She dismounted smoothly, tied her horse to the post near the water trough and said, "Where are your account books?" "Inside. I'll show you." She followed him in without another word. Dale Cutler stood where he was watching them go, and his expression was a mixture of things Ethan didn't have time for. He'd talk to Dale later. Right now, he had a woman in his house who was already taking her coat off and looking around at the general disorder of the main room with the particular expression of someone who has just identified a project. "Your books," she said. "Are they in this room? That cabinet, by the window?" She went to it, opened it, looked at what was inside, turned and looked at him. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, "what exactly happened here? I told you I was bad at it." She pulled out the first ledger and opened it to a random page. She turned it sideways. She turned it back. She looked up at him again. "This isn't bad," she said. "This is... I don't even have a word for what this is." "Catastrophic." She almost smiled. "Not quite. I was going to say creative, but catastrophic will also work." She was back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, she had reorganized the supply records, identified 3 separate ordering errors from the previous season, caught a billing mistake that had been costing Ethan money for over a year, and quietly, without being asked, mended a torn feed sack and restacked a pile of grain storage that had been organized in a way that made no structural sense. Ethan noticed all of it. He didn't say anything about most of it. He'd learned quickly that Amelia Carter didn't respond well to attention being drawn to what she did. She received compliments with a sort of careful stillness, like she was waiting for the second part, the part where the compliment turned into something else. So he said thank you. When thank you was appropriate, he left it at that. What he did do was make sure she knew the kitchen was available to her at midday. He made sure there was always coffee made. He stopped Dale from making certain comments with a single look that said everything Ethan needed to say without a word. Dale, to his credit, shut up about it. Mostly. She's strange, Dale told him one evening. No offense. People in town say she's a beast, Ethan said evenly. Would you say she's acted like one since she's been here? Dale chewed on that for a minute. No, he admitted. She's quiet, works hard, doesn't bother anybody. Then she's not strange, Dale. She's just private. Why does she wear that scarf over part of her face when she's outside? Same reason you sleep with the light on, Ethan said. Everybody's got something that makes them feel safer. Leave it alone. Dale opened his mouth. Leave it alone, Ethan said again. Dale left it alone. It was in the second week that it happened, the thing Ethan hadn't been expecting, though later, he'd wonder why he hadn't seen it coming. He came inside from fixing a section of fence that had gone down in the wind and found Amelia at the kitchen table. She wasn't working on the books. She was just sitting there, her hands flat on the table surface, and she was staring at something Ethan couldn't see. He stopped in the doorway. She heard him and looked up, and for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, her guard was completely down. Her face was unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. Whatever she'd been sitting with, whatever thought or memory had caught her, was written on her in that unguarded moment with complete honesty. She looked tired. Not tired the way people are tired at the end of a long day. Tired the way people get tired from carrying something for too many years. Then the guard came back up and she said, I finished the February inventory. There's a discrepancy in the hay records. I left a note. Thank you, he said. You okay? She looked at him like the question surprised her. Fine. You don't have to be fine, he said. I'm not asking so you'll tell me everything's perfect. I'm asking because you looked like you were somewhere difficult just now. She was quiet for a long moment. I got a letter, she said finally. From my sister. That's good, isn't it? She's getting married. A pause. She wanted me to know that she said she wants me there. She stopped. But, Ethan said gently, but her future husband's family is prominent. In a city. She wrote to tell me she wants me there, and then spent the rest of the letter explaining why it might be better for everyone if I... She stopped again. Her jaw set. If I found a reason not to come. Ethan didn't say anything right away. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. And he thought about what that kind of letter feels like. The kind where someone tells you they love you, right before they tell you that love has conditions. Did she say it like that? He asked. Those words? No. She was very careful. A small, humorless sound. She always was. Amelia. He hadn't used her name before. Just ma'am or nothing at all. She looked up at him. You don't have to go to anything you don't want to go to. I know that. And you don't have to stay away from anything because someone else is embarrassed. That's their problem to carry, not yours. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't quite read what was in her eyes. It was layered, complicated, the way feelings are when they've had a long time to fold over on themselves. You're very easy to talk to, she said, and she sounded slightly suspicious of that fact. People tell me that, he said. I think it's because I'm too tired most of the time to say anything that isn't true. That got a real response. A short sound half-laugh surprised out of her before she could stop it. She pressed her lips together immediately after like she was reeling it back in. But it had been there. Ethan had heard it. And that sound, honest and small and entirely unplanned, settled somewhere in the center of his chest and stayed there. The 2 weeks became 3, then 4. Nobody formally acknowledged that Amelia was staying. She just kept coming. She kept working. The books of the Rafter W had never been more organized. The supply orders had never been more accurate, and the kitchen had never smelled the way it smelled now, like someone was actually cooking in it, using it the way it was meant to be used. She made meals sometimes. Not always, and never with any ceremony. A pot of something on the stove when it was cold. A pan of cornbread when the hands came in from a hard day. She didn't ask if it was wanted. She just did it the way she seemed to do most things, quietly, practically, without making a fuss about it. The ranch hands there were 5 of them. Steady men who'd been with Ethan for years watched her the first week with the same careful wariness they brought to most new things. By the second week, they'd settled into a kind of respectful neutrality. By the third week, one of them, a young man from Texas named Holt, who talked too much and meant well, had started leaving extra firewood near the side door without being asked, because he'd noticed that was the door she used in the mornings, and the walk from the wood stack was long. Dale noticed. He didn't say anything about it. But Ethan saw him watching the young man do it, and the expression on Dale's face was something that might, if you were generous, have been the beginning of a change of mind. The first time trouble came from town, it came quietly. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Ethan had gone into Red Hollow for a meeting with the bank, a routine thing, nothing urgent, and he'd come back to find 2 horses tied at the gate of the lane and 2 men he recognized standing near the barn. One was the town's minister, a thin, serious man named Reverend Pruitt. The other was the mayor, a man named Edgar Hobbs, who had smooth hands and hard eyes. Amelia was nowhere in sight. Ethan dismounted and walked toward them without hurrying, but not slow either. "Reverend, Edgar, didn't know you were coming." "We thought it was time we spoke to you directly," Edgar Hobbs said. He had the voice of a man who was used to that sentence, meaning something used to people straightening up when he spoke. Ethan looked at him pleasantly. "What about the arrangement you have here?" The mayor gestured toward the house. "The woman you've brought onto your property. My bookkeeper," Ethan said. "People are talking, Ethan. People always are. What are they saying?" The Reverend stepped in before Edgar could answer. He had a gentler voice, but the message wasn't gentle. "People are concerned about appearances, about the message it sends a man of your standing keeping company with a woman like..." "A woman like what?" Ethan said. The Reverend paused. "Choose your words carefully," Ethan said. "Not loud, just clear." "There are questions about her character," the mayor said. "Her history. People in this town have known her for 4 years, and she's never been forthcoming about the scar," Ethan said. "That's what this is about." "About her past," the mayor said. "About why she came here alone, why she has no family." "She has a sister," Ethan said. "Who writes her letters." That seemed to stop Edgar Hobbs for a moment. "The point," the Reverend said, recovering, "is that there are people in this community who have concerns, and we thought it was our responsibility to come here and ask me to remove her from my own property," Ethan said. "That's what you're asking." Silence. "I appreciate you riding out," Ethan said. "I'll give that the consideration it deserves." He walked past them toward the house and then stopped and turned back. "Just so we're clear," he said. "I've been in Red Hollow buying supplies and doing business for 7 years. In that time, I've treated every person in that town with fairness. I've employed 6 men from this county. I've paid my taxes and attended services and by and large left people to their business." He paused. "I intend to keep doing all of those things, and Miss Carter is going to stay on this property for as long as she chooses to." He went inside. From the window he watched the 2 men stand there for a long moment, before they mounted their horses and rode back toward town. He turned around. Amelia was in the hallway. She'd heard all of it. Her face was doing something complicated. She had both hands pressed together, fingers interlaced, held against the front of her coat. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. It's going to cause you problems. Probably. Ethan? She hadn't used his first name before either. It seemed to catch her off guard too, the way she said it. She pressed her lips together for a moment after. You don't know me, not really. You don't know where I came from, or what happened to me, or why people... She stopped. You don't know if they're right. I know you reorganized my winter supply records and found a billing error that was costing me $12 a month, he said. I know you haven't once asked for anything you weren't entitled to, and you've given considerably more than I've asked for. I know that the men on this property treat you with more respect every week that passes. He looked at her. I know what kind of person you are, Amelia. That's enough. She looked at him for a long time. Her hands came apart. She unclasped them, let them drop to her sides. I had a life before this, she said quietly. Before the scar, before Red Hollow, before all of this. A pause. It ended badly. You don't have to tell me, he said. I know, but I... Another pause. She looked at the floor, then back up at him. I want you to know that what people say about me, the things they imply, none of it is true. I haven't... She exhaled. I just want you to know that. I know that too, he said. I've known it since the day I watched you walk down that street. Something moved across her face. Something that wasn't the careful stillness she usually carried. Something that was trying to be believed, really believed for the first time in a long while. Why? She asked. How? Because of the way you held that basket, he said simply. Guilty people don't hold on to things like that, like they're trying to stay anchored. She looked away. Her jaw was working slightly, the way jaws do when someone is pressing down hard on something they don't want to let out. I'm going to finish the March projections, she said, and walked back toward the kitchen. But she stopped in the doorway. Without turning around, she said, Thank you for what you said to them. Then she went back to her work, and Ethan stood in his hallway for a moment in the quiet house that had started slowly, impossibly, to feel like a home again. The twist came on a Thursday. It came in the form of a man Ethan had never seen before, a man who rode up to the ranch with too much confidence, and a horse that cost more than anything on the property. His name was Robert Calloway, and the way Amelia went still when she saw him from the window, the way all the blood left her face in a single instant told Ethan everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. He went outside. This is private property, Ethan said. Can I help you? Calloway looked him up and down with the cool assessment of a man who was used to looking down at people, even when they were bigger than him. I'm looking for a woman named Amelia Carter. I was told she's working here. What's your business with her? That's between me and her. Not on my land, it isn't. Calloway smiled, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. I'm a family friend, from her past. Does she know you're coming? It's a surprise. His smile widened just slightly. A reunion. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the house where he knew Amelia was watching from behind the window glass. Wait here, he said. He went inside. Amelia had moved from the window. She was standing at the center of the room, and she was so still that she looked like she'd been carved from something. Her arms were wrapped around herself, not in warmth, but in something closer to bracing. You know him, Ethan said. Yes. Do you want to see him? She looked at Ethan. The question had been simple, uncomplicated. Did she want to? Not you should probably not, he's come all this way. Not it would be rude not to. Just do you want to? No, she said. Then you don't have to. He turned and went back outside. Calloway was still there, still smiling. She's not available, Ethan said. The smile got careful. I don't think she had a chance to decide that for herself. She decided. Ethan looked at the man steadily. You should go. Mr. Walker. Calloway's voice dropped, got smoother, got the kind of reasonable that isn't reasonable at all. I don't think you understand what you have here. This woman, she's not who she appears to be. There are things about her past that you... Get off my property, Ethan said, quiet, final. Calloway looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned his horse around and rode back down the lane, and neither the pace nor the set of his shoulders said that this was over. Ethan went back inside. Amelia was where he'd left her. Still braced. Still. "He's gone," Ethan said. She let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "Who is he?" Ethan asked. She was quiet for a moment. "He's the man who gave me the scar," she said. The room went very quiet. Ethan said nothing for a moment. He let that land. Let it be what it was. "Did you tell the law?" "He was the law," she said. "In the county where it happened. His family owned half of it." "That's why you came here." "That's why I came here," she confirmed. Her voice was flat now, the flatness of someone delivering information they've had to practice delivering without feeling it. "And that's why people in this town think what they think. Because he told them." Ethan went to the door. He looked down the lane where Calloway had ridden. "He sent word ahead," he said. It wasn't a question. "He's been doing it for 4 years," she said. "Every time I find somewhere to go. She stopped. "I didn't want to bring this here. I want you to know that. When I came, I didn't think he'd found Amelia." He turned around. "Stop apologizing." She stopped. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "Not 4 years ago, not today." She looked at him like someone who has been told something they very badly want to believe and aren't sure yet if they're allowed to. "He'll come back," she said. "Yes." Ethan agreed. "He probably will." He crossed to where she was standing and stopped a few feet away and looked at her steadily. "When he does," Ethan said, "I'll be here." It was a simple sentence. 4 words with no decoration on them. But Amelia Carter looked at Ethan Walker in that moment, like he had just handed her something she hadn't known she'd been waiting years to receive. She straightened. Not much an inch, maybe, but she was a woman who had learned to measure inches, and Ethan saw it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just stay." She stayed. That night the fire burned low in the main room of the Rafter W, and outside the wind had picked back up to the kind of mean that reminded you winter wasn't finished with Wyoming yet. Ethan sat in the chair by the fire with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and he thought about the man on the expensive horse, and about the 4 years Amelia had spent moving from place to place with a scar on her face and a shadow following her, and nowhere that was truly safe. And he thought about what it meant that he had told her to stay. He'd built walls around this place, around himself. After the grief that had settled into him years ago and never entirely left, he'd decided that walls were safer, that things that stayed behind walls didn't hurt you. But here was the truth he was sitting with alone in the quiet house on the edge of the Wyoming winter. He had let her in. Not strategically, not because he needed a bookkeeper, though the books certainly needed someone. He had let her in because of the way she held that basket. Because of the short, surprised laugh she hadn't meant to let out. Because of the way she said "your books, Mr. Walker," like she was trying very hard not to smile at the chaos inside that cabinet. Because she was a person who had been told over and over and over by people who should have known better that she was something to be afraid of. And she had kept getting up anyway. Every day she had gotten up. She had kept walking. He set down the cold coffee and looked at the fire. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know what Calloway would do, or what the town would say, or what tomorrow would look like. But he knew this much. Tomorrow, Amelia Carter would wake up on this property, and she would know that someone was standing between her and what was coming. Not in front of her, not hiding her, not making decisions for her, just beside her. And for tonight, Ethan decided that was enough. The fire burned lower. The wind pushed against the walls. And inside the Rafter W, for the first time in a long, long time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, and Amelia Carter lay awake in the small room Ethan had given her at the back of the ranch house, listening to that fullness, and not knowing what to do with it. She had slept in a lot of places over the past 4 years. Boarding houses where the walls were thin and the landlords asked too many questions. A widow's spare room in a town she'd left after 3 weeks because someone had scratched something ugly into her door. A converted storage room behind a laundry in Cheyenne that smelled like lye and old wool, where she'd told herself she was fine and almost believed it by the second month. She had never once in any of those places felt what she felt right now. Safe wasn't even the right word. Safe implied the danger was gone. The danger wasn't gone. She knew Robert Calloway had ridden back down that lane with the face of a man who was regrouping, not retreating. He would be back. He always came back. But tonight she was lying in a room on a ranch where a man had looked at Robert Calloway, a man who had always been able to make other men step aside simply by existing in a space, and had said, "Get off my property," like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like she was worth saying it for. That was what she couldn't sleep with. Not the fear, not even the relief. The fact that someone had said it like she was worth it. She turned onto her side and stared at the wall and thought, "Don't get used to this." That had been her rule for 4 years, and it had kept her from being destroyed. Don't get used to warmth, because warmth gets taken away. Don't get used to safety, because safety is a thing people offer right up until the moment they find out it's costly. Don't get used to kindness, because kindness is almost always the shape that something else wears before it shows its real face. She had been very good at that rule. She was starting to think she was getting bad at it. Outside, the wind pushed against the house, and the house held. She listened to that, the push and the hold, until her eyes finally closed. She was up before the sun, not because she had to be, not because anyone had asked her to. She was up because 4 years of survival had wired her body to be moving before the world was awake to have something done, before anyone could question why she was there. She put coffee on. She checked the fire. She pulled the ledger books out of the cabinet, her cabinet now ordered and labeled and nothing like the chaos she'd found in it 6 weeks ago, and sat down at the kitchen table and started working through the spring ordering projections she hadn't finished the night before. She heard Ethan's boots on the floor above her at 5:30. He came down the stairs and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her, and then at the coffee pot, and then back at her, and she could see him running a quick assessment. Is she okay? Did she sleep? Does she look like she's about to bolt? And she appreciated that he ran it quietly without making her perform reassurance for him. "You didn't have to make coffee," he said. "I know." He poured himself a cup and sat down across from her with the ease of someone who had stopped needing to announce himself in his own kitchen. She'd noticed that about him, the way he moved in a space like he understood what he was allowed to take up. Not aggressive, just comfortable. Sure. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "You?" "Some." He turned the cup in his hands. "I've been thinking about Calloway." "So have I." "He didn't come alone," Ethan said. "I mean, he came alone to the gate, but a man like that doesn't travel alone. He's got people with him somewhere, probably back in town." She had already thought this. She had thought it approximately 87 times since she'd seen his face in the window. He has money. He's always had money. And money moves things. What does he want? She looked at him. "Not what does he want with me," Ethan said carefully. "I know the answer to that one, and it makes me want to put a fist through a wall. I mean, what does he actually want? Is it about the scar? Is it about punishing you? Is there something else?" She was quiet for a moment. She had never said the full version of this to anyone. She had carried it in pieces, told one part to a woman in Cheyenne who'd helped her when she first ran, told another part to a preacher in a small town north of Laramie, who'd had kind eyes and bad judgment about who he then told. She had learned to be careful. But she looked at Ethan Walker sitting across from her with coffee in his hands, and sleep-short eyes that were still entirely present, entirely focused, entirely there. And she thought, if I can't say it to him, I can't say it to anyone. "He comes from a family that runs the county where I used to live," she said. "His father was a judge. His brother is the sheriff. His family has had money and influence there for 3 generations. She set down her pencil. When I was 26, I worked as a school teacher in that county. Robert Calloway was a city councilman. He was engaged to another woman. She stopped. Take your time, Ethan said. Not pushing, just leaving the door open. He decided he wanted me instead, she said. And when I told him no, when I told him that it wasn't something I was interested in, that he needed to leave me alone, he did not respond well to that. A pause. He came to my house. He told me that no one had ever told him no, that I didn't understand what I was doing. Her voice stayed flat. That flatness was armor she'd built over a long time, and she was grateful for it right now. He made sure I understood it. And then he left, and the next morning he told people I had gone to his house, that I had been inappropriate, that when he'd told me to leave I'd threatened him, and people believed him, Ethan said. His father was the judge, she said. His brother was the sheriff. His family had been there for 3 generations. She looked at her hands on the ledger. Yes, they believed him. Ethan was quiet. I left, she said. I ran, actually. Middle of the night with what I could carry. I came north. She touched the left side of her face, not the scar itself. She rarely touched it directly, but near it, like acknowledging something nearby. He found me in the first place I went. Told people there what he'd told people at home. That I was dangerous, unstable, that the scar... She stopped. Started again. He told people I'd given it to myself. The sound Ethan made was very quiet and very controlled. It was the sound of a man keeping something inside that wanted very badly to come out. I moved again, she said. And again. And he kept finding me. I don't know how still. Maybe hired someone. Maybe just waited until I settled long enough to trace. She picked up the pencil again. That's the whole story. That's all there is. She went back to the ledger. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. She heard him set down his cup, heard him stand up, heard him walk to the window. Then he said, I'm going into town today. She looked up. Not to confront him, he said, and his voice was careful now, each word chosen. But to understand the situation, to find out who he's talked to and what he's said. He turned from the window. I want to know what we're dealing with. A man like that doesn't just want to scare you. He wants to take something. I need to know what he thinks he can take. We're dealing with. She noticed that. She noticed it the way you notice something being given to you that you hadn't expected. Be careful, she said. He looked at her. He's good at making people choose his side, she said. He's charming. He knows how to sound reasonable. People look at him and they see... She gestured slightly. Meaning money manners, confidence, everything a town respects. They don't look at him the way they look at me. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm going. He was gone for 3 hours. In those 3 hours, Amelia finished the spring projections, reorganized the South Pasture grazing schedule that Dale had made a mess of, and ate exactly half a piece of cornbread she'd made out of the need to do something with her hands. Holt came in once tracking mud, and she told him to wipe his feet, and he did without argument. Dale appeared in the doorway, took one look at her face, seemed to calculate something, and said, Those fence posts we were talking about need to wait till spring thaw. Thought you should know in case it affects the supply order. It was the most he'd said to her directly in 6 weeks. She registered that without comment and said, I'll adjust the numbers. And he nodded and left. She was starting to understand Dale Cutler. He was not a man with a bad heart. He was a man with a weathered one, worn down by too many years of seeing things go wrong, until caution had hardened into something that looked from the outside a lot like meanness. She recognized that armor. She'd built something like it herself. She was halfway through the adjusted order form when she heard horses outside. Not 1 horse. 3. She went still in her chair. She heard voices, but not Ethan's. Male voices, 2 of them talking in the lower register that men use when they're trying to sound official. She heard Dale's voice, shorter clipped, the way Dale talked when he was being careful. She got up. She went to the side window and looked. 2 men she didn't recognize stood near the barn, with Dale between them. They had the look of men hired for a specific purpose, not ranch hands, not travelers. Something more deliberate. One of them had a piece of paper in his hand. Not a letter, a document of some kind, official-looking. Dale shook his head at something they said. One of the men gestured toward the house. Amelia's hand pressed flat against the wall. She made herself move. Coat. Her good coat, the one she'd brought, not the working one. She put it on, and she put her shoulders back, and she opened the back door and walked around the side of the house. Dale saw her coming. Something shifted in his face. Relief, she thought, and something that surprised her protectiveness. "Miss Carter," he said in a voice that was carrying a message she couldn't quite decode. The two men turned. "Miss Amelia Carter," the one with the paper said. "Yes," she said. He held the paper out toward her. "I'm authorized to deliver this to you. It's a civil claim, filed in the name of Robert Calloway in the county of—" "I can read," she said. She took the paper. She looked at it. Her hands stayed steady. She was proud of that. She read the language: defamation, false accusations made against the character of Robert James Calloway, damages sought, and she understood exactly what she was holding. She was holding Robert Calloway's next move. He hadn't come to Red Hollow to find her. He'd come to sue her. "This is not a valid jurisdiction for this claim," she said. She kept her voice even. "This county has no standing to enforce a civil action from—" "The claim has been filed in the territorial court," the man said. He had a practiced patience about him, the kind hired men develop when their job is to deliver bad news to people who push back. "It has standing. I need to speak with—" She stopped. With who? She had no lawyer. She had no family here. She had Ethan, who was in town, who didn't know this was happening. "You'll receive a court date by post," the man said. He touched the brim of his hat. "Have a good day, ma'am." They mounted and rode back down the lane. Amelia stood where she was holding the paper. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What is it?" "A legal claim," she said, "filed by the man who was here yesterday." Dale was quiet again. Then, "What for?" "For telling the truth," she said. "That's what for." She turned and walked back into the house. She sat down at the kitchen table. She put the document flat on the surface in front of her and she looked at it. 4 years. 4 years of running, of rebuilding, of learning how to be invisible enough to survive. And Robert Calloway had found a way to make the law into a weapon and bring it right to the door she'd thought foolishly for 1 week might actually hold. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She would not cry. She had stopped crying about this particular thing a long time ago, and she was not going to start again now. But she let herself feel it for exactly 1 minute, the weight of it, the crushing specific unfairness of it, the way the world kept finding new shapes to punish her with. She let herself feel all of that completely, because she had learned that you had to let it in, or it would come back sideways. 1 minute. Then she picked up her pencil and wrote at the top of a clean page what I need to know about territorial civil law. She was going to need information. She was going to need someone with legal knowledge, and she was going to need to think about this very carefully before Ethan came back. Because the moment he came back and saw that paper, something would happen behind his eyes. She already knew the shape of it, and she needed to have thought it through before that happened, so she could be clear-headed enough for the both of them. That was something she'd never had to do before. Think for 2 people. She found she wasn't entirely opposed to it. Ethan came back at 11:15. He came through the front door and stopped when he saw her face. He was still wearing his road coat, still had the cold on him, and he took one look at her and said, "What happened?" She handed him the document. She watched him read it. She watched his face, the way the calm held for about 5 seconds. The way something very specific moved through his jaw, the way his eyes got colder, in a way that paradoxically made him look more controlled, not less. He finished reading. He put the document down. He said nothing for almost 10 seconds. "When did they come?" he said. "About an hour after you left." "Of course." A pause. He sent them while I was in town, so I couldn't be here. He looked at her. Are you all right? I'm functional, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. I'm angry, she said. I'm very, very angry. And she stopped. Tired. I'm tired of this being the shape of my life, of running and rebuilding and then running again. Then stop running, he said. Ethan, I mean it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He wants you to run. That's always been the goal. You run, and he finds you again, and eventually you run somewhere he's already been, so he can say you were unhinged enough to come back to the county he controls. Running is how he wins. He put his hands flat on the table. So stop. She looked at him. Stay here, he said. Fight it from here. I don't have legal resources. I have a lawyer, he said. Man named Patterson in Cheyenne. Good man, honest, has handled territorial cases before. He looked at her directly. I'll write him today. Ethan, this will cost money. This will take time. It will make things complicated here for you with the town. Amelia, he said, and the way he said her name was different now, less careful, more direct, like he'd decided something, and the decision was final. Listen to me very carefully. I am not afraid of Robert Calloway. I am not afraid of this document. And I am not afraid of what the town says. He paused. I'm asking you to trust me. Not because I've earned it yet. Because I'm asking you to give me the chance to. She looked at him for a long time. She had been given reasons to trust people before, and they had not held up. She knew that. She knew this could be another version of the same story, a man who seemed solid right up until the moment the cost got too high, and he stepped back, stepped aside, let it happen. She knew all of that. And she looked at Ethan Walker's face, which had never once, in 6 weeks, done the thing she was always waiting for faces to do. All right, she said. He nodded. He stood up. He picked up the document folded. It put it in his coat pocket. Now, he said, what did you find out in town? She asked it because she'd almost forgotten in the shock of the legal papers that he'd gone in to gather information. He stopped. More than I expected. He sat back down. Calloway has been in town since yesterday evening. He's staying at the hotel. He's had 3 separate conversations that people reported to me, one with Edgar Hobbs, one with the Reverend, and one with Gerald at the store. Gerald, she said, surprised. Gerald, Ethan confirmed. And Gerald, to his considerable credit, told me about it immediately and used several words about Calloway that I will not repeat in your presence. Something loosened slightly in her chest. Hobbs is worried about his reputation. The Reverend is the Reverend is the Reverend. He always needs more information before he decides anything, which means he's currently neutral, which is better than I expected. He paused. But here's the thing, Amelia. Calloway's story doesn't hold together. I spent 2 hours this morning asking careful questions, and his version of events has 3 separate inconsistencies that anyone who's paying attention would notice. People don't usually pay attention, she said. These people are starting to. He looked at her. Do you know why? She waited. Because they've watched you for 6 weeks, he said. Coming and going, working, eating, living like a normal person who hasn't done anything wrong. He leaned forward slightly. People make up their minds based on what they see. They'd made up their minds about you based on rumor and a scar. But they've been seeing something different for 6 weeks, and that's starting to count. She thought about Dale leaving the extra firewood, about the way Gerald had apparently used expletives on her behalf, about the young man Holt leaving her with more firewood than she needed every single morning without being asked. I didn't know that, she said quietly. I know you didn't, he said. You never look for it. You're always looking for the bad version. Because the bad version is usually what's there. Not always, he said. Not here. She looked down at the table. The ledger books were still spread in front of her, and the spring projections were half done, and there was a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her life spread across a table. Ordinary and specific, and nothing like the chaos of the past 4 years. Write your lawyer, she said. I will. This afternoon. And Ethan, she looked up. What he said to people in town, what his version of events was. He said you were an obsessed former student who had followed him across the territory, Ethan said. His voice was very controlled. He said you'd made false accusations against him in the county where you both lived, and that when the claims were dismissed, you came north and continued harassing him. The room was very quiet. He's practiced, she said. Yes. A pause. But he didn't expect you to have anyone standing for you. He expected to walk in here, file a legal claim, and have you fold. The whole thing is built on you not having anyone in your corner. And now I do, she said. Now you do. Gunt. The letter to Patterson went out that afternoon. What came back 6 days later was not Patterson's reply. It was a second document from the territorial court. And this one had Ethan's name on it. Amelia was the one who picked up the mail. She stood at the post office counter and looked at the envelope addressed to Ethan Walker Rafter W. Ranch and felt the specific cold that comes when a situation escalates beyond where you thought it was. She brought it back. She set it on the table in front of Ethan without a word. He opened it. He read it. He set it down. He's claiming the ranch sheltered you against his legal interests, Ethan said. He's filing a separate nuisance claim against the property. He's coming after you now, she said. Yes. Ethan. Amelia. I need you to stop looking at me like you're about to tell me you'll leave, he said. Not angry, just clear. I can see it forming on your face, and I need you to stop. She closed her mouth. I know what you're thinking, he said. You're thinking this is your fault, and the right thing to do is remove yourself from the situation so I don't get hurt. He looked at her. And I'm telling you that if you leave, that's exactly what he wants. And it won't protect me anyway, because he's already filed. The only thing your leaving would accomplish is leaving you alone with nowhere to go, and leaving me here without someone who's been managing my books better than anyone I've ever employed. She wanted to argue. She had the argument built and ready. She'd been building it since she walked in the door with that envelope. Tell me I'm wrong, he said. She thought about it. She hated that she couldn't. You're not wrong, she said, but this is going to get worse before it gets better. Most things do, he said. I've been ranching for 15 years. I've never seen a fence that fixed itself. She looked at him. Then, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him. She laughed. A real one. Not the short, surprised sound from before, but an actual laugh, brief and genuine and slightly exhausted. He blinked. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Sorry, she said. Don't apologize, he said. And he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, not the careful evaluation, not the steadiness, but something warmer and slightly undone. Don't ever apologize for that. She lowered her hand. They looked at each other across the table. And the thing that had been building between them quietly without ceremony in the space made by coffee. Going cold and ledger books spread out. And the particular familiarity of two people sharing the same air for 6 weeks pushed up toward the surface, just enough that they could both feel it. Then, Dale knocked on the doorframe and said, Wire came. Patterson's coming Thursday. Ethan looked away first. Good, he said. He stood up. Good. He picked up both documents and went to the cabinet where Amelia kept the organized files, and he put them in the folder she'd labeled legal correspondence in her careful handwriting, and he paused with his hand on the folder for just a moment. Stay, he said, not turning around. Whatever happens next, stay. She was quiet. Then she pulled the ledger toward her and picked up her pencil. I'm not going anywhere, she said. And the house held against the wind, and the fire burned in the grate, and somewhere 9 miles down the road, Robert Calloway was sitting in a hotel room thinking he was winning. He had no idea what he was up against. Not just Ethan, not just Amelia. Both of them at the same table with the same documents and the same stubborn refusal to fold, and something between them that was only just beginning and already far more powerful than anything he'd brought to their door. He had no idea what he was up against. Not just Ethan, not just Amelia, but both of them at the same table, with the same documents, and the same stubborn refusal to fold, and something between them that was only just beginning and already far more powerful than anything Robert Calloway had brought to their door. Patterson arrived on Thursday. He came in on the afternoon stage from Cheyenne, a compact man in his late 40s, with quick eyes and a leather satchel that had seen better decades. He shook Ethan's hand at the door, nodded at Amelia, in a way that communicated he already knew who she was, and had already formed an opinion which she found both reassuring and slightly unnerving. And then he sat down at the kitchen table and opened his satchel and got directly to business without wasting a syllable on small talk. Amelia decided she liked him immediately. "Tell me everything," Patterson said. "Start at the beginning. Leave nothing out. I'll stop you when I need clarification." So she told him. All of it. The county, the Calloway family. The night Robert came to her house. The morning after, when his version of events had already moved through the town like weather. The running. The 4 years of stopping and starting and running again. The scar, how she'd gotten it, what he'd told people about how she'd gotten it. Patterson didn't react visibly to any of it. He made notes. He asked precise questions. He circled things on the documents she'd received and wrote notations in the margins. When she finished, he looked at both documents for a long moment. Then he said, he overplayed his hand. Ethan looked at him. "The second filing, the nuisance claim against the property, that was a mistake," Patterson said. "Up to that point, this was a personal civil matter between Calloway and Miss Carter, which is a difficult enough situation to navigate cleanly. But the moment he named the property and its owner, he dragged this into territorial jurisdiction in a way that actually benefits us." He tapped the second document. He thought he was broadening his attack. What he actually did was give us a much wider stage to defend on. "Meaning what exactly?" Amelia asked. "Meaning that in a territorial proceeding, discovery is broader," Patterson said. "We can request documentation, records. We can ask him to prove the claims in his original filing, not just assert them. And a man whose version of events has 3 significant inconsistencies," he glanced at Ethan, who'd apparently communicated this in his letter, "is going to have a very difficult time when someone starts pulling on those threads in a formal setting." Amelia pressed her hands flat on the table. "He has family connections. He has money. He has those things in his home county," Patterson said. "Here, he has a hotel room and a lawyer I happen to know personally, who I also happen to know takes cases like this because the money is reliable, not because he believes in them." He closed his satchel. "I've seen this pattern before, Miss Carter. Men who are used to operating in territory they control get careless when they step outside it. They assume their weight travels with them." "Does it?" she asked. Patterson looked at her. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but not always, and I intend to make sure it doesn't here." After Patterson left to find accommodations at the hotel, which Amelia noted with a grim satisfaction, meant he would be sleeping under the same roof as Robert Calloway, she sat back in her chair and exhaled for what felt like the first time in a week. Ethan was watching her. "Stop," she said without looking at him. "Stop what?" "Stop waiting for me to fall apart." "I'm not waiting for you to fall apart," he said. "I'm watching you not fall apart, which is an entirely different thing and considerably more impressive." She looked at him. He was completely serious. She looked away before whatever was happening in her chest could reach her face. That night something changed. Not dramatically. Not the way things change in stories with a moment you can point to afterward and say, "That was it. That was the exact second." It changed the way the light changes in a room when a cloud moves gradual and then suddenly unmistakable. They were sitting by the fire after supper, both of them, which had started happening in the past 2 weeks without either of them making a decision about it. Amelia had a mending project in her hands, one of Dale's work shirts that had a tear along the shoulder seam, and Ethan had the week's correspondence in his and wasn't really reading it. "Tell me something," Amelia said. He looked up. "You lost someone," she said. "Before I came. The house the way it was when I got here, that's not a house where someone lives alone by choice. That's a house where someone stopped." He was quiet for a moment. She half expected him to deflect, to say something careful and bounded. Instead, he said, "Her name was Clara, my wife, 7 years ago." Amelia set down the mending. "Fever," he said. "It came fast. 1 week she was fine, and then she wasn't, and then she was gone." He looked at the fire. "I built this ranch for us. Every post, every board, I had a picture in my head of what this place was going to be. And then she was gone, and the picture stayed." He paused. "I couldn't take it down, and I couldn't look at it, so I just stopped looking." "The silent house," Amelia said quietly. "The silent house," he agreed. She thought about what he'd said to her that first day at the store. "I'm bad at it." The books, the accounts, the ordering. He'd built systems with Clara probably. And when she died, the systems had collapsed. Not because he was incompetent, but because competence was something they'd built together, and alone, it didn't hold the same shape. "She would have kept better books than you," Amelia said. Something surprised a sound out of him, half exhale, half laugh. "Considerably better. She kept perfect accounts, down to the last penny." A pause. "She would have liked you." Amelia looked at him. "You don't know that." "I do, actually. Clara liked people who didn't perform, who just were what they were." He looked at her sideways. "You're the most genuinely yourself person I've met in 7 years." She thought about that. "I don't know if that's a compliment. Being myself has not historically served me well." "It's serving you now," he said simply. She picked up the mending again. Her hands moved, but her mind wasn't on the stitches. She was thinking about Clara, about a woman she'd never met, who had loved this silent house into life, and then left it silent again. She was thinking about what it costs a person to build something beautiful, and lose it, and keep getting up anyway. She understood that. She understood it very precisely. "Ethan," she said. Whatever happens with Calloway with the legal proceedings," she kept her eyes on the mending. "I want you to know that I understand if it becomes too much, if the cost gets too high. I won't—" She stopped, chose words. "I won't hold it against you." He was quiet for long enough that she looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. "I know you won't," he said. "That's not what worries me." "What worries you?" A pause. "That by the time this is over," he said carefully, "and you're standing on solid ground, you'll decide you don't need to stay here. And you'll be right, and I won't have any reasonable argument against it." The fire cracked. The room was warm. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the mending and said very quietly, "Ask me to stay." The silence was exactly 3 seconds. "Stay," he said. "Please." She nodded once at the shirt in her hands. "All right," she said. The first hearing was set for 2 weeks out in the territorial courthouse in Laramie. In those 2 weeks, Red Hollow made up its mind. Not all of it. Not cleanly. Nothing in a small town ever happens cleanly. But something shifted, and the shift was visible in specific ways that Amelia noticed because she noticed everything, because noticing had kept her alive. Gerald at the general store started greeting her by name when she came in. Not a dramatic change. Gerald was not a dramatic man, but by name and with eye contact, which he had not done before. The 2 women from the dress shop who had leaned toward each other in disgust when she passed one of them, the younger one stopped her on the boardwalk one morning and said quietly and quickly, like she was afraid of being overheard, doing something decent, "I heard some things about that man at the hotel. I'm sorry for—" She'd paused, gestured vaguely at the space between them, meaning everything. "I'm sorry." Amelia had said thank you, and meant it, and walked on. The barber, the man who had crossed to the far edge of the boardwalk when she passed, nodded at her now. Just a nod. But it was a nod. None of this would have happened, she understood, without Ethan. Not because he'd told people what to think, but because his presence beside her had made her visible in a different way. She had been visible before as something to avoid. Now she was visible as someone a man like Ethan Walker had chosen to stand with. And that changed the geometry of the situation for people who operated by social coordinates. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her resented it that her worth to these people was mediated through his. that it had taken a man they respected to make them look at her like a person. She mentioned this to Ethan. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right, and that's a real injustice, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't." He looked at her. "But I'll also say some of them were already watching you, already seeing you. I just gave them permission to act on it." "That's a generous interpretation, maybe." He shrugged. "But Gerald told me last week that he'd thought there was something wrong with the story from the beginning. Said a woman who can walk through that street every day without ever once being ugly about it back isn't a woman who did what Calloway claimed she did." She thought about Gerald's careful face, his non-answers, his not-quite expressions. "He's more perceptive than he looks," she said. "Most people are," Ethan said. "Given time." Robert Calloway came to the ranch one more time before the hearing. He came alone, which surprised her, and he came in the middle of the afternoon, which surprised her more. She was in the barn, Ethan's old mare, a gray named Patience, who had developed a trust for Amelia over the past weeks, in the way animals develop trust incrementally and honestly, and she heard the horse coming up the lane and looked out and knew immediately who it was from the way he sat the saddle. She walked out. She didn't go back inside. She didn't send for Ethan, who was out checking fence line with Dale. She stood in front of the barn, and she waited. Calloway pulled up and looked down at her. He looked different than he had through the window. Closer. Real. She had spent 4 years with him in her head, as a kind of shadow large, indefinite everywhere. Up close in the afternoon light, he was just a man. A man with expensive clothes and tired eyes and the particular expression of someone who has been surprised to find that something is harder than he expected. "Amelia," he said. "Mr. Calloway," she said. He didn't dismount. She noticed that. He stayed on the horse, which kept him above her, which she recognized as a choice. "I came to offer you a settlement," he said. His voice was the same smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man who understood that tone was half the argument. "Drop the territorial defense. Sign a statement acknowledging that the original claims were the result of personal distress and not founded in fact. In exchange, I withdraw both filings." She looked at him. "No," she said. He blinked, just slightly. "No," he repeated. "No." She kept her voice even. She had practiced this, not the words specifically, but the evenness, the refusal to let him see the places where he still had access. "I will not sign a statement saying I lied, because I didn't lie, and I will not drop a legal defense that is valid and properly filed, because dropping it would be the same as giving you exactly what you came here for, Amelia." He let her name sit there like a reminder of something, like he thought her name in his mouth still had the power to make her small. "You have to understand your position here. I have resources. I have a lawyer with territorial experience. You have a story with 3 inconsistencies," she said, "and a lawyer I've been told takes cases for money, not merit." He went still. "You told people I gave myself this scar," she said, and she touched the side of her face directly this time, deliberately fully, without flinching. "You've been telling that story for 4 years, to every town I moved to every person who might have helped me, and it worked for a long time because I was alone, and you were—" She looked at him, level and clear. "You." Something moved behind his eyes. Not remorse. Not even close to remorse. Something colder, recalculation. "You're not alone now," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." "Walker is one rancher," Calloway said. "He has no legal standing to—" "He's not standing for me in court," she said. "Patterson is. Walker is standing for me everywhere else." A pause. "And apparently so are a few other people in this town that you underestimated." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." He pulled the horse around. "This isn't over," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll see you in Laramie." He rode back down the lane. She stood where she was until he was out of sight. Then she sat down on the mounting block beside the barn door, put her elbows on her knees, and breathed. In and out. Slowly. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, the trembling in her fingers, the adrenaline working its way out through her extremities. She pressed them together and held them still. She had just done something she had never done before. She had faced him and not moved. Holt came around the corner of the barn and stopped when he saw her. He was 17 years old and from Texas, and he had the emotional instincts of someone who had been raised by a woman who noticed things, and he looked at her shaking hands and her set jaw and said with remarkable accuracy, "You want me to go get Mr. Walker?" "Not yet," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." He nodded. He went back around the corner. He didn't go far. She could hear him not going far. She counted her breaths. 4 minutes later, she stood up. "Now you can get him," she told Holt. Ethan came back at a run, which was the first time she'd seen him do that, and when he came through the barn door and saw her standing upright and functional, he stopped and exhaled and said, "Holt said Calloway was here." "He offered me a settlement," she said. "I declined." He looked at her. "You talked to him alone," he said. "Yes." "Amelia." "I know," she said. "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't come find you, but She stopped. "I needed to do that one by myself. I needed to know I could." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide something. She could see it happening, the brief internal argument between the part of him that wanted to say you should have waited, and the part that understood exactly what she'd just said and why it mattered. The second part won. "What did he say?" Ethan asked. "That it isn't over." "What did you say?" "That I'd see him in Laramie." Something crossed his face, specific and warm and proud in a way that was entirely unperformed. "Good," he said. The day before they left for Laramie, the second twist arrived, and it arrived in the form of a letter. Not from Calloway, not from the court, from Amelia's sister. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her sister Eleanor had always written in a careful, forward-leaning script that their mother had taught them both when they were girls, and seeing it on an envelope addressed to the Rafter W. Ranch made something seize in Amelia's chest. She opened it standing at the kitchen table. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she put it down and stood very still. Eleanor had written 8 pages. 8 pages, which was more than she'd written in the entire 4 years combined. And the letter was not the careful, qualified thing Amelia had been expecting, was not another diplomatic navigation of how much her sister loved her versus how much her presence was a complication. Eleanor had heard about the lawsuit. Someone Amelia would never know who had sent word to Eleanor about the proceedings about Robert Calloway appearing in Wyoming territory with legal filings, and Eleanor had apparently spent 3 days not sleeping before she picked up a pen. The letter said, "I knew what he did to you. I've always known. I told myself that speaking meant involving our family in a legal matter. We couldn't win, that his family had too much power, that you had already left and were safe. I told myself so many things, Amelia, and every one of them was a lie. I told myself so I didn't have to tell the truth to anyone else. It said, I am prepared to testify. I am prepared to give a sworn statement. I know things about Robert Calloway and the night he came to your house that will hold up in a territorial proceeding because I was there. Not in the house, but after. You came to me. You came to me before you ran, and I sent you away because I was afraid, and I have not slept a full night in 4 years because of it. It said, please tell me it is not too late. Amelia sat down. She sat down because her legs were done. She sat there with 8 pages of her sister's handwriting, and she felt 4 years of a specific aloneness, the particular kind that comes not from having no one, but from believing the people who should be there have made their choice, begin to crack open in a way she hadn't expected and was not remotely prepared for. She was crying before she registered she was going to. Not a sob, not dramatic, just tears that came with the pressure of something releasing that had been held tight for a very long time. Ethan came in from outside and stopped. He took in the letter spread on the table and her face and said nothing. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, And he didn't ask what it said, and he didn't tell her it would be okay. He just sat there, close enough that his arm was warm against hers. She let him. After a while, she said, "My sister wants to testify." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that?" he started. "She was there," Amelia said. "After. She saw me that night. She knows what really happened." She pressed her hands flat on the letter. "She sent me away because she was scared. She's been carrying that since." "Do you believe her?" he asked carefully. Amelia thought about Eleanor, her careful handwriting, her careful words, her careful way of existing in a world that was easier for people who didn't make difficult choices. She thought about what it would cost Eleanor to testify, to put her name on a document, to stand in front of a court and say I was wrong to stay silent. "Yes," she said. "I believe her." "Then I'll write Patterson tonight," Ethan said. "He needs to know before the hearing." She nodded. She folded the letter carefully. She held it in both hands for a moment, and then she put it in the inside pocket of her coat, close against her chest, which was not something she'd done with a piece of paper in a very long time. "Ethan," she said. When I walked into your store that first day—" "You came into my store," he said, mock confused. Despite everything, she almost smiled. "When Gerald told you about me, when you watched me through the window—" She paused. "You had no reason to cross that street." "I crossed it because that man said something wrong," he said. "I know. But you could have said something to him and walked away. You didn't have to come find me afterward. You didn't have to offer me work. You didn't have to—" She gestured at everything, the whole accumulated weight of the past 2 months. "Any of this." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." "Why?" He thought about it. Genuinely thought the way he did when he was being honest rather than just reflexively decent. "Because you held that basket like it was the only solid thing," he said finally. "And I know what that looks like. I spent 2 years after Clara died holding onto fence posts and saddle horns and coffee cups the same way." He looked at her. "I thought if someone had come and stood next to me in those 2 years in some particular bad moment, it might have made a difference." She looked at him. "So you stood next to me," she said. "So I stood next to you," he confirmed. The fire was low. Outside, the night had come down fully, and the stars over Wyoming were the kind that only happen far from towns bright and specific, and enormously indifferent to human difficulty. "We should sleep," Amelia said. "Laramie is a long day." "It is," he agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. Then Ethan said quietly, "Whatever happens in that courthouse, whatever Patterson does or doesn't manage, I want you to know something." She waited. "You already won," he said. "Not legally, not officially, but you stood in front of that man in the yard today, and you didn't move. And you wrote to Patterson. And you're going to Laramie." He paused. "You already won the part that matters most." She looked at the fire. "The part that matters most," she said slowly, "is that I'm not alone when I do it." He didn't say anything, but she felt him beside her, solid and present and entirely chosen. They left for Laramie at dawn. Patterson had already gone ahead the day before to prepare. Ethan had arranged for Dale to manage the ranch, and Dale had accepted this responsibility with the grim competence of a man who has been given a real job and intends to do it properly. Amelia came out of the house in the cold early morning with her good coat and her bag, and stopped when she saw that Ethan had brought the wagon rather than horses. "It's a long road," he said simply. She climbed up. They rode for a while in silence, the kind that had become comfortable between them. Not empty, not awkward. Just the natural quiet of two people who had said enough to each other that they no longer needed to fill all the spaces. After an hour, Amelia said, "What if the judge doesn't rule in our favor? Then we appeal," Ethan said. "And if the appeal, then we figure out the next thing," he said. "There's always a next thing." She thought about that. "You're very practical," she said. "Ranching teaches you that," he said. You lose a calf in winter, you don't spend 3 weeks mourning. You figure out what comes next. You keep the herd alive. Is that what I am? She said. Part of the herd. He glanced at her sideways. You're the person who keeps the books that keeps the herd alive. Better? She said. He smiled. She could see it in profile, that rare, real smile that he didn't put on for anyone that just arrived when something genuinely struck him. She looked back at the road, and somewhere behind them, Red Hollow was waking up. Gerald was opening the store. Dale was checking fence posts with Holt right behind him. The Reverend was having his morning coffee and probably reconsidering a few things. And in the hotel, Robert Calloway was preparing his case. His smooth, reasonable story, his hired lawyer, his 4 years of practice at making one version of events erase another. He didn't know about Eleanor's letter. He didn't know what Patterson had been building quietly and methodically since the moment he'd arrived with his battered satchel and his quick eyes. And he didn't know, he could not have known, because he had never met a man like Ethan. Walker had never understood what it looked like when someone chose another person, not out of pity or strategy or expectation, but simply because that person was worth choosing. He didn't know what was coming. The wagon rolled forward through the morning cold. Amelia pulled her coat tighter and looked at the road ahead. She was not running. For the first time in 4 years, she was moving toward something instead of away from it, and the difference between those two directions was larger than any distance she had ever traveled. The difference between those two directions was larger than any distance she had ever traveled. And Amelia Carter held that thought like a compass the entire ride into Laramie, letting it point her forward when the cold and the fear tried to turn her around. They arrived in Laramie at 3:30 in the afternoon. Patterson was waiting for them at the hotel where he'd arranged rooms, a clean, respectable place 2 blocks from the courthouse that smelled like wood polish and coal smoke, and the particular kind of order that comes from people who take their work seriously. He met them in the lobby with his satchel already open and a sheaf of papers in his hand, and he looked at Amelia with those quick eyes and said, "Your sister's statement arrived this morning by wire. I had it transcribed and notarized within the hour." Amelia stopped walking. "She sent it already," she said. "She sent it 3 days ago," Patterson said. "She didn't wait to hear back from you first. She just sent it." Something happened in Amelia's throat. She pressed her lips together and nodded once and said, "What does it contain?" "Everything," Patterson said simply. "The night in question, your condition when you arrived at her house, what you told her, what she saw." He paused. "She also included a statement from the doctor who treated you the following morning, a man named Hennessy, who apparently kept his notes." Ethan beside her went very still. "Calloway doesn't know about the doctor," Amelia said. "No," Patterson said. "He doesn't." A pause, and something that might, on a less contained face, have been satisfaction. "He's going to." They sat in Patterson's room for 2 hours that evening, going through the structure of the following day. Patterson was methodical, thorough, and absolutely unsentimental about the process, which Amelia found deeply comforting. He told her what the opposing lawyer, a man named Briggs, would likely argue, how he intended to counter it, and what he needed from her if she was called to speak. "Will I be?" she asked. "Possibly," he said. "Briggs will try to make this about your credibility, about the pattern of moving from town to town, about the accusation that you pursued Calloway. I'm going to object to most of it on relevance grounds, but some of it will get through." He looked at her steadily. "If it does, and you speak, I need you to be exactly what you are, not more, not less, just precise and honest." "I've been precise and honest for 4 years," she said. "It hasn't helped much." "It will help tomorrow," Patterson said, "because tomorrow you won't be alone in a room full of people who already decided what they think. Tomorrow there's a judge and a record, and Eleanor's statement, and Dr. Hennessy's notes." He closed the file. "Tomorrow the truth has somewhere to land." She looked at him. "You believe me," she said. Not a question. Just the recognition of something she was still not entirely used to. "Miss Carter." Patterson said, "I've been practicing law for 22 years. I have a very reliable instinct for who's telling the truth. Yes, I believe you. He stood up. Get some sleep, both of you. I need you clear-headed in the morning. Nem. She didn't sleep much. She lay in the dark room and listened to Laramie at night. The sounds of a larger town, more voices, more horses, more life than Red Hollow. And she thought about Eleanor. Eleanor, who had sent her away that night. Who had stood at her own front door, looking at her younger sister's ruined face, and the fear in her own eyes had been bigger than anything else. Amelia had understood it even then, had understood in the cold shock clarity of that night that Eleanor was not a cruel person, just a frightened one. Frightened of Calloway's family. Frightened of what choosing Amelia would cost her. She had told herself in the years since that she did not blame Eleanor. She had not been entirely sure she was telling herself the truth. But tonight, thinking about 8 handwritten pages and a sworn statement sent before she'd even been asked, she understood that Eleanor had been carrying this the same way Amelia had been carrying it. Differently shaped, different weight, but the same material. Guilt looks different on the person who caused something and the person it happened to. But it uses the same bones. She would need to write to Eleanor after this was over. A real letter, not a careful one. She fell asleep somewhere around midnight with that thought in her hand, like something she intended to keep. The courthouse in Laramie was a serious building full of serious people, and Amelia walked into it the next morning beside Ethan Walker, with her spine straight and her hands loose at her sides and her heart doing something complicated that she breathed through steadily and did not let show on her face. Patterson was already there at the table on the left side of the room. Briggs Calloway's lawyer was at the right. He was a heavy-set man, with a gray mustache and the unhurried manner of someone who has won enough cases that losing no longer feels like a real possibility. Robert Calloway was sitting behind him. He saw her come in. She looked at him directly, which she had not done in 4 years, and she let him see her looking, and she watched his expression shift through something surprised, she thought, and then the quick recalibration of a man adjusting to a situation he hadn't fully mapped. She sat down. Ethan sat in the gallery 2 rows back directly in her sightline. She didn't look at him, but she knew he was there. The judge was a compact, gray-haired man named Alderman, who had the eyes of someone who had been lied to professionally for 40 years and had developed excellent systems for noticing it. Briggs opened his case smoothly. He presented Calloway's claims in the organized, reasonable language of a man who understood that tone was half the argument, the same understanding Calloway himself had passed down, or perhaps taught. He spoke about defamation, about a pattern of harassment, about a woman who had followed his client across a territory, making claims that had been reviewed and dismissed in their home county. He was good. Amelia had to admit that. He made it sound very plausible. Then Patterson stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform outrage. He was simply methodically, absolutely precise. He said, "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence 3 documents. The first is a sworn statement from Eleanor Marsh-Ney Carter, sister of the respondent, describing the events of the night in question and the respondent's condition when she arrived at Mrs. Marsh's home." He set it on the judge's desk. The second is a transcription of Dr. William Hennessy's medical notes from his examination of the respondent the following morning, which he retained in his records. He set that down. The third is a copy of the original claim filed against the respondent in the claimant's home county, which I draw Your Honor's attention to, in particular, because the date of filing is 4 days before the events the claimant says the respondent reported to county authorities. The room shifted. Amelia felt it, the specific atmospheric change of a room when something lands that changes the shape of everything. Briggs was on his feet. "Your Honor, I object to the relevance of—" "Sit down, Mr. Briggs," Judge Alderman said mildly. He picked up the third document. He read it. He read it again. He looked at Patterson. 4 days prior. Yes, Your Honor, the claimant filed a preemptive claim before the respondent had spoken to anyone, which raises the question of why a man with nothing to hide would need to file preemptively. Silence. Briggs sat down. Amelia kept her breathing even. Patterson said, I would also like to note that the nuisance claim filed against the property of Ethan Walker contains no legal basis under territorial code, as I will demonstrate. And he began citing statute numbers with the calm certainty of a man who had been up until 2 in the morning, specifically so he could do exactly this. Amelia stopped hearing the specific words for a moment. She was watching Judge Alderman's face. She was watching the way he read Eleanor's statement. The way his eyes moved through it, not quickly, not skimming, but with attention. The way he set it down and then picked it up again to reread a section. She had spent 4 years trying to make people read things like that. Trying to make people take that same quality of attention and point it at the truth. She had never had Patterson before. She had never had Eleanor's statement before. She had never had a doctor's notes. She had never had Ethan Walker 2 rows back, present and chosen and entirely unbothered by the cost of being there. The session broke for midday recess at 11:15. Patterson came to her immediately. "He's going to call you," he said. "Briggs is going to put you on the stand this afternoon. He knows the documentary evidence is damaging, so he's going to go for credibility, for emotion. He's going to try to make you seem unstable." "I know," she said. "Don't give him anything to work with," Patterson said. "Precise, honest, nothing extra." "I know," she said again. "I've been practicing being unreadable for 4 years. I'm very good at it." Patterson looked at her. "Don't be unreadable," he said, and that surprised her. "Be readable. Be exactly who you are. The judge is watching everything. Let him see you." She thought about that. Ethan was beside her now, and he said nothing, which was exactly right, and she felt his presence the way you feel a solid wall in the dark. Not something you're leaning on, but something you know is there. "All right," she said. Briggs put Calloway on the stand first in the afternoon session. Calloway was exactly what she'd known he would be: composed, credible, full of the particular sadness of a wronged man. He spoke about concern, about a troubled young woman, about attempts to help that had been misconstrued. He was careful never to be explicitly cruel. He let the cruelty sit in the spaces between his careful words where it was harder to object to. Amelia watched him perform for 30 minutes and felt something settle in her, very cold and very clear. She had let this man define her for 4 years. She was done with that. Briggs called her to the stand just after 2 o'clock. She stood up. She walked to the stand. She sat down. She looked at Briggs. He started gently, of course he did. Background questions: where she'd lived, where she'd worked, how long she'd known the claimant. He was building something she could feel the shape of it, laying foundations with innocent-sounding questions, so the structure he was going to drop on her would have somewhere to land. "Miss Carter," he said, "isn't it true that you developed a personal attachment to my client during the period you taught in his county?" "No," she said. "Isn't it true that you pursued a relationship he did not encourage?" "No." "Isn't it true that when he asked you to stop contacting him, you became—" "No," she said. "None of that is true." Briggs paused. He'd expected more. More defensiveness, more emotional response, something he could shape. She gave him nothing except the flat, precise negative. "You've moved," he said, changing direction, "multiple times in the past 4 years. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Would you say that pattern of moving reflects a stable life?" "I would say it reflects a life that was made unstable by a man who followed me," she said. He moved on quickly. He asked about her relationship with Ethan, about the ranch. He implied, without quite saying it, that her current living situation reflected poorly on her character. Patterson objected twice. Alderman sustained both. Briggs tried a different angle. "Miss Carter, you claim my client injured you, but you have no witnesses to that alleged event." "My sister witnessed the aftermath," she said. "Her sworn statement is in evidence. Your sister, who has a natural interest in supporting your account." "My sister," Amelia said carefully, "who took 4 years to come forward because she was afraid of your client's family. The fact that it took her 4 years to be brave enough to tell the truth is not evidence that the truth isn't true. The room was very quiet. Briggs looked at her. She looked back. "No further questions," he said. Patterson stood. "Miss Carter," he said, "when you left your home county 4 years ago, did you tell anyone where you were going?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I was afraid," she said. "I had just been hurt by a man whose family controlled the legal apparatus of the county. I had gone to my sister, and she had asked me to leave because she was afraid. I had nowhere to go and no one to speak for me, and I was afraid that if I told anyone where I was going, he would find me." "And did he find you?" "Every time," she said. "Every place I went within months, he found me." "Do you know how?" "I believe he hired someone to track me," she said. "I have no proof of that." Patterson nodded. He picked up the third document. "Are you familiar with this document? The claim filed against you in your home county?" "Yes." "Did you at any point before the date on this filing make any formal report or accusation against the claimant?" She looked at Calloway. He was watching her with the controlled expression of a man who has suddenly understood that the floor is not as solid as he thought. "No," she said. "I hadn't spoken to anyone. I had only just left." "So he filed a claim against you," Patterson said, "before you'd said a word." "Yes," she said. "He did." Patterson looked at the judge. "No further questions." Judge Alderman took 40 minutes. 40 minutes in which Amelia sat in the gallery beside Ethan and did not speak and did not move, and breathed in and out with the patience of someone who has survived worse waits than this. Ethan's hand was on the bench between them. Not on her hand, just near it. Available. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held on. When Alderman came back, he sat down and looked at his notes, and then looked at the room, and said in the measured voice of a man who had made his decision, and was going to deliver it without drama, "I find for the respondent on all counts." The words landed. Amelia heard them. She heard them and felt them, and held on to Ethan's hand harder than she meant to, and then made herself let go and breathe. Alderman continued. He cited the preemptive filing. He cited Eleanor's statement and Dr. Hennessy's notes. He cited the lack of evidentiary support for Calloway's account and the multiple inconsistencies Patterson had surfaced. He cited the nuisance claim against the Walker property as without legal foundation. He looked at Calloway directly when he said, "The pattern of behavior documented in this proceeding raises questions this court is not in a position to adjudicate today, but which I am formally noting in the record, and referring to the Territorial Attorney General's office for review." Briggs was already leaning toward Calloway. Calloway's face had done something Amelia had never seen it do before. He looked small. Not physically, he was still the same size, still the same expensive coat, still the same carefully composed face. But something in the architecture of his confidence had collapsed, and without it, he looked like exactly what he was, a man who had always won because no one had ever made him lose, suddenly confronted with what losing felt like. She had imagined this moment many times over 4 years of moving and hiding and trying to stay invisible. She had imagined feeling triumph. What she actually felt was quieter than that. Calmer. A deep, specific settling like ground that had been muddy for years finally firming underfoot. She stood up. Ethan was beside her. Patterson came toward them through the clearing room, and he looked at Amelia and said simply, "Well done." And she understood he was not talking about the outcome alone. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your sister," he said. "And thank Dr. Hennessy, who kept 30-year-old medical notes and organized files, which is more than most people manage." He shook her hand. Then Ethan's. "I'll send my billing to the ranch." He picked up his satchel and walked out. Calloway was still in the room. Amelia knew it without looking. She could feel the particular weight of his presence which had followed her for 4 years, which she had spent 4 years trying to outrun. She turned around. He was standing near the door with Briggs, and his eyes met hers across the emptying room. She had thought about this moment too. What she would say. Whether she would say anything. Whether there were words that were worth saying to a man who had proven over 4 years that words did not reach him. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she turned away and walked out. She did not run. She did not hurry. She walked out of that courthouse at the same pace she'd walked through Red Hollow's main street, with her head down for years, except this time her head was not down. This time she walked out the way you walk out of something that is finished. Ethan caught up with her on the courthouse steps. The afternoon had turned cold, a sharp, bright Wyoming cold, the kind that clears everything out and leaves the world feeling very specific and immediate. "You didn't say anything to him," Ethan said. "No," she said. "Did you want to?" She thought about it honestly. "I wanted to for about 3 years," she said. "I had speeches, long ones, very detailed." She paused. "But standing there, I didn't want to give him any more of my time. I've given him 4 years. That's enough." Ethan looked at her. "That's the healthiest thing I've ever heard anyone say," he said. "Don't tell Patterson. He'll want to put it in a brief." He made that sound again, the half-exhale, half-laugh, the one she'd first pulled out of him weeks ago, and had been quietly collecting since. They stood there for a moment in the cold air. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "We can stay tonight, head back tomorrow. Or we can start back now, if you'd rather not be here." She thought about it. She thought about the hotel room, and Laramie at night, and the road back to Red Hollow. She thought about the Rafter W with its organized cabinet, and its always stocked firewood, and the fire that Holt would have banked down, and Dale would have kept going in his particular methodical way. "I want to go home," she said. The word arrived before she'd planned it, landed in the cold air between them, very specific and entirely true. Ethan heard it. She saw him hear it. "Then we go home," he said. They were an hour out of Laramie, the wagon moving through the early evening cold, when Amelia said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask?" he said. "What happens now? With—" She gestured slightly. "Meaning us this. The thing between them that had been building for 2 months, with neither of them naming it directly. What do you want to happen?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone avoiding the question, the quiet of someone taking it seriously enough to answer honestly. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as a bookkeeper, not as—" He stopped, chose words. "I want you to stay as the person you are. At the ranch. In my life." He looked at the road. "I want to build something with you if you're willing. I don't need to do it quickly. I don't need a decision tonight." He paused. "But I wanted you to know that's what I want." She listened to the wagon wheels on the frozen road. She thought about Clara, who had loved this man and built a life with him and left him with a silent house. She thought about what it means to build something, knowing you can lose it, knowing it might not hold. She had spent 4 years deciding the risk wasn't worth it. She looked at Ethan Walker's profile in the growing dark, the set of his jaw, the easy way he handled the reins, the deliberate quality of every choice she'd ever watched him make. "I'm not easy," she said. "I've been the past 4 years have made me careful in ways that aren't always comfortable to be around. I don't trust quickly. I don't open easily. I expect things to go wrong, and sometimes I act like they already have before they do." "I know," he said. "And I'm going to keep doing that for a while," she said. "It doesn't just stop because things have changed." "I know that too." "And you still want—" "Amelia," he said patiently. "I spent 2 years talking to fence posts because they were better company than my own thoughts. I can handle careful." She looked at him. "Also," he added, "your books are extraordinary, and I genuinely cannot afford to lose you professionally." She laughed. A real one, full and surprised, and entirely unguarded. He smiled at the road. "Yes," she said when the laugh had settled. "I'll stay. I want to stay." He nodded once, the way he nodded when something mattered, and he wasn't going to perform how much. They rode the rest of the way in the dark, the stars coming out above them, the cold settling in around the wagon, and neither of them needed to fill the silence, because the silence was already full of everything they'd just said. The twist that Amelia had not seen coming arrived 11 days later. Not from Callaway, he had gone back to his home county with his dismissed filings and the Attorney General's referral following him like a shadow, and she did not expect to hear from him again. Not directly. Some men, when they finally lose, understand that they have lost and retreat to the territory where they still have power. The twist came from the town. It came in the form of a gathering at the community hall in Red Hollow, which she did not know about until the night before, when Gerald appeared at the ranch in person. Gerald, who had never in Amelia's knowledge left his store during business hours for any reason short of a fire. He stood at the door with his hat in his hands and said to Ethan, "There's a meeting tomorrow evening. Town matters." Then he looked at Amelia. "People want to see you there." She looked at him. "Which people?" she said. Gerald cleared his throat. "Most of them," he said. After he left, she stood in the kitchen and felt the specific anxiety of that most of them, with all its possible interpretations. "It could be anything," Ethan said. "It could be anything," she agreed. "Do you want to go?" She thought about the street she'd walked for 4 years with her head down, about the women who had whispered, about the man who had crossed to the far edge of the boardwalk so as not to be near her, about the woman who had said, "I'm sorry," quickly, like she was afraid of being seen doing something decent, about Gerald standing at her door with his hat in his hands. "Yes," she said. "I want to go." The community hall was full. Not packed. It wasn't every person in Red Hollow, but it was most of them, and the room had the particular quality of people who have assembled to do something they've collectively decided matters. Amelia walked in beside Ethan, and the room shifted the way rooms shift when the person everyone was waiting for arrives. Edgar Hobbs was at the front. He looked for the first time in Amelia's experience of him uncertain. Not his practiced authority face. Actually, uncertain. He said, "We heard about the ruling in Laramie." "News travels," Ethan said evenly. "We also heard—" Edgar stopped, restarted. "Some of us have been talking about the way things have been in this town. The way people—" He stopped again. He was not a man built for this kind of speech, and Amelia found somewhat to her surprise that she appreciated the visible effort it was costing him. The Reverend stepped in. He had his hands clasped in front of him. "We owe you an apology, Miss Carter," he said. "This community treated you poorly from the moment you arrived. We made assumptions. We repeated stories without questioning them." He paused. "We were wrong." The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at the Reverend. She looked at Edgar Hobbs. She looked at the woman from the dress shop, the younger one who had said "I'm sorry" on the boardwalk, who was in the third row with her hands pressed together in her lap. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the speech she would have made 2 months ago, careful, guarded, saying the right things without giving anything real. Then she thought about Patterson. "Don't be unreadable. Be exactly who you are." "I accept your apology," she said. Not "it's fine." Not "don't worry about it." The easy social phrases that would have let everyone off the hook and meant nothing. "I accept it, and I mean that genuinely. And I want you to know—" She paused. "I understand how this works. A person arrives in a place with a story already following them, and a face that makes people uneasy, and no one to speak for them. I understand why you believed what you believed." She looked at the room. "But I also need to say clearly," she continued, "that the cost of that belief was real. 4 years of it in this town and others is a real cost that a real person paid. And I would ask not for me because I'm fine, but for the next person who arrives here with something following them and no one to speak for them. I would ask you to think before you decide." The room was very, very quiet. Then Gerald in the back started clapping, not enthusiastically, not dramatically, just slowly, deliberately, the way a man claps when he means it and doesn't care what it looks like. Someone else joined. Then another. Amelia stood there and let it happen and felt something she had stopped believing in somewhere in the second year of running start to come back. Not safety, not vindication. Belonging. The tentative, fragile, real kind. The kind that doesn't come all at once, but arrives in increments in specific moments, in a man clapping in the back row, and a woman with sorry in her eyes, and a reverend who found it in himself to say, "We were wrong." Ethan's shoulder pressed against hers. Barely. Not a performance for the room. Just contact. Just, "I'm here." She pressed back. Just as slightly. Just as deliberately. And Red Hollow, imperfect and weathered and full of people who were still learning how to be better, held them both in that moment. And it was not everything. It would never be everything. But it was enough. It was for tonight, exactly enough. And Amelia Carter went to sleep that night, understanding for the first time in 4 years that enough was not a small thing. Enough was everything when you had spent years without it. The weeks after the community hall meeting moved differently than the weeks before. Not faster. Not smoother. Real life doesn't work that way. It doesn't reward a good moment by removing all the friction from the ones that follow. But the friction changed character. It became the ordinary kind, the kind that comes from two people building something together and occasionally disagreeing about how a thing should be done, rather than the grinding kind that comes from surviving something hostile. Dale was the first one to mark the change in his particular way. He came to Amelia one morning with the south pasture grazing schedule she'd adjusted 3 weeks ago, set it on the table in front of her and said, "You were right about the rotation. We got more out of the east section than I expected." She looked at the schedule, then at him. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, picked up the schedule, started to leave. Then he stopped in the doorway and said without turning around, "Clara used to reorganize things too. Drove me half crazy at first." A pause. Usually turned out she was right. He left. Amelia sat with that for a moment, the specific weight of being compared to a woman she'd never met, and the specific grace of the comparison, which was not an erasure, but an acknowledgement. Dale was telling her in the only vocabulary he had that she had been allowed in, that the space she occupied had been considered and accepted. She picked up her pencil and went back to work. Eleanor came in April. Amelia had written her the real letter, the one she'd promised herself in the Laramie hotel room, not careful, not qualified. She'd written it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening while Ethan read correspondence nearby, and she'd told Eleanor everything she hadn't said in 4 years. The anger, the loneliness, the specific grief of being sent away by the one person she'd gone to. And at the end, she'd written, "I don't want to carry this between us anymore. I don't know if you do either. But I think we should find out." Eleanor's reply had come back in 2 weeks, which was fast for the distance, and it said, "Tell me when. I'll come." So she came. She arrived on the afternoon stage looking like Amelia's memory of her, and also entirely different older. Yes, but also carrying something that hadn't been there before. A visible weight. The kind that settles on a person when they've been holding something heavy for a long time and have finally decided to put it down. Amelia met her at the stage stop. They looked at each other for a moment. Eleanor's eyes went to the scar briefly and involuntarily, the way everyone's did, and then they came back to Amelia's face. And what was in them was not pity or discomfort, but something rawer and more honest than either. "You look well," Eleanor said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "I am well," Amelia said. "Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table with coffee between them, which was where Amelia seemed to do all the important things in her life now. And for a while they talked around the edges, the journey, the weather, the look of the ranch, the spring that was finally coming to Wyoming after a long winter. Then Eleanor set down her cup and said, "I'm sorry, Amelia." "I know," Amelia said. "I don't mean I don't want you to just accept it because it's easier," Eleanor said. "I want you to know that I understand what I did. I sent you out alone into that cold, and I told myself it was the practical thing, the safe thing." Her jaw was working. "There is no version of that I can make acceptable." Amelia looked at her sister. She had thought about this conversation many times. The versions where she said everything sharp and precise and fully true. The versions where she was magnanimous and gracious and let Eleanor off gently. The versions where she said nothing and let silence do the work. What came out was none of those. "You were scared," Amelia said. "I know you were scared. I was scared too." She paused. "And you sent a sworn statement to a territorial court before I even asked you to. And Dr. Hennessy's notes, I didn't know about those." "How did you know?" Eleanor looked at her hands. "I went to him the next morning, after you left. I told him what I'd seen and asked him to write it down. I didn't know if it would ever matter. I needed to do one right thing." She looked up. "It wasn't enough, but it was what I had." Amelia thought about that. About a woman sitting across from a doctor the morning after asking him to write down something she didn't know if she'd ever use, holding on to it for 4 years just in case. That was not nothing. It was not forgiveness for what came before it. But it was not nothing. "It mattered," Amelia said. "Patterson said it was decisive." Eleanor pressed her lips together, nodded. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," Amelia said. "Because it wasn't. But I'm also not going to carry it anymore. I've been carrying too many things, and I'm putting some of them down." She looked at her sister steadily. "I want you back in my life, if you want to be there." Eleanor made a sound that she pressed her hand over immediately. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to be there." They sat with that for a moment. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway. He had the particular skill of arriving at exactly the right moment, without it looking engineered, and he looked at the two women at the table and said, "I'm making supper. Are you staying, Mrs. Marsh?" Eleanor looked at him. Then at Amelia. Something in her expression shifted a reassessment, the kind that happens when you arrive expecting one thing and find something considerably better. "Yes," she said, "I believe I am." Ethan made supper, which he was not as bad at as he'd been before Amelia reorganized the kitchen and the pantry and the supply ordering, and the three of them ate together with Dale and Holt at the long table, and the conversation moved. The way conversation moves when people are figuring out each other's rhythms in real time. A little careful, a little curious, and then gradually over the course of an hour easier. Eleanor watched Ethan and Amelia the way an older sister watches something she is trying to assess fairly, and is finding harder to object to than she expected. After supper, when Dale and Holt had gone, and Ethan had stepped out to check on the horses, Eleanor said to Amelia quietly, "He looks at you like you're the most solid thing in the room." Amelia picked up the plates. "He looks at everything like he's taking it seriously." "Not everything," Eleanor said. "Specifically you." Amelia set the plates down. "He asked me to stay," she said. "Months ago. And then again. He keeps asking, which I think is his way of making sure I know the invitation is real, and not just something that was said once and might have an expiration date." "Does it?" Eleanor asked. "Have an expiration date?" "No," Amelia said. "I don't think it does." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. "Are you happy?" The question arrived simply, and Amelia let it sit for a moment before she answered, because it deserved a real answer, not a reflexive one. "Yes," she said. "I think I am. I don't mean happy like everything is easy. I mean happy like I'm somewhere I chose to be with people I trust, doing work that matters, and I wake up in the morning without the first thought being about how to survive the day." She paused. "That's what happy feels like, I think. When you've gone a while without it." Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The twist that arrived in May was the one that changed everything for the last time, and it came not from outside, but from within, which was the only kind of change that was ever permanent. It came on a Thursday evening, ordinary, in every way supper done. The house settling into its nighttime quiet. Ethan sitting across from Amelia at the kitchen table with the spring accounts spread between them. He'd been quiet for the better part of an hour. Not unusually, Ethan was often quiet, but this was a different quality of quiet. She could feel it. After months of sitting across from this man, she had learned the textures of his silences, the way you learn the sounds a house makes, each one distinct, each one meaning something specific. This one meant he was working up to something. She kept her eyes on the accounts and waited. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask," she said. He put down his pen. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the steadiness, not the warmth, not the careful consideration. Something beneath all of those. Something that had been living underneath everything else for months and had finally come to the surface because it was done waiting. "Marry me," he said. Not "will you marry me?" Not a question with a question mark on it. A statement. Direct and undecorated the way he said everything that mattered. The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at him. She thought in rapid succession about the first day on the street, and the basket in her hands, and the sound of his voice saying, "She's not a beast," and the cabinet full of chaos that had become her cabinet, and Patterson in his battered satchel. And Dale saying usually turned out she was right. And Eleanor at the table, and the morning she had stood in the yard and faced Robert Calloway without moving. And every morning she had woken up in this house and felt the specific particular feeling of being somewhere she had chosen. She thought about Clara, who had loved this house into life. She thought about herself, who had loved it back. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. It was a short sound, not dramatic, just air, just the release of something held. But it told her everything about how much it had cost him to ask. How much he had wanted it. How much he had been afraid she would say no, or not yet or someday, but not now. "Yes," she said again, because it bore repeating. He reached across the accounts, all the careful numbers, all the organized evidence of a life built together, and took her hand. She let him. They married in June. Small. The Reverend, who had earned his place in the ceremony by the sincerity of his public apology and said the words over them with a conviction that surprised everyone, including possibly himself. Gerald, who stood in the back and did not cry technically, though his eyes were doing something that looked like close relatives of crying. Dale, who wore his good shirt and stood very straight and at one point had to look at the ceiling for an extended period. Holt, who cried openly and without embarrassment in the way that only very young men from Texas can do. Eleanor, who stood beside Amelia and held her flowers, and did not let go of her hand until the last possible moment, and who looked for the first time in Amelia's memory entirely unburdened. The ceremony was short. The words were simple. Ethan said what he meant, and nothing more, which was the only way he knew how to say anything. And Amelia said what was true, which was also the only way she knew. When it was done, Gerald put his hat back on and said to no one in particular about time. Dale told him to be quiet. Holt laughed through what were definitely not tears. But the real moment, the one that Amelia would carry for the rest of her life, the one that was the actual ending and the actual beginning, came 3 days later. She had gone into Red Hollow alone, not hiding, not moving quickly, not taking the route that avoided the most people. She had gone in on horseback in the middle of the morning and tied up in front of the general store and gone inside to pick up the week's order. Gerald had it ready. He always had it ready now. He handed it over the counter and said, "Heard about the wedding. Congratulations, Mrs. Walker." Mrs. Walker. She had not heard it yet. Not from someone else's mouth. She stood there for a moment with the package in her hands and felt it land the weight and the rightness of it. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. She walked back out. She was on the boardwalk untying her horse when she heard it. A man's voice behind her to someone else. Not trying to be quiet. Not bothering to modulate. The same careless volume that certain men use when they haven't yet learned that their words have weight. That's the woman Walker married. The one with the... A pause, a gesture she could feel without seeing, indicating her face. Strange choice, if you ask me. Amelia stopped. She stood with her hands on the reins. She thought about what she would have done a year ago. Kept walking. Kept her head down. Absorb it and move and pretend it hadn't found the exact right spot where it still hurt. She turned around. The man was young, a stranger, a traveler. The kind who passed through a town without knowing anything about it and made judgments from the surface of things. He was talking to another man she didn't know. He had not expected her to turn. She looked at him. "She didn't ask you," she said, calm, level, entirely unhurried. He blinked. She waited one beat long enough for him to understand she was not embarrassed, not flustered, not going to look away first, and then she mounted her horse and rode down the main street of Red Hollow. And she held her head up. Not defiantly, not performing anything for anyone. She held it up because that was how she held it now. Because she had earned the posture through everything that had happened in the past year, everything that had broken and been put back together differently, stronger in the broken places, the way good things get stronger when they're repaired honestly. The street passed on either side of her. Gerald was in his doorway. He nodded. The woman from the dress shop was outside with a broom. She raised a hand. Dale was at the far end of the street loading something into a wagon. He looked up, saw her, gave the short, sharp nod of a man who has transferred his considerable loyalty from one category to another and is fully settled in the new one. She rode through all of it. She rode through the town that had called her a beast and learned it was wrong. She rode through the 4 years of running and the courtroom in Laramie and the community hall and Eleanor at the kitchen table and all the mornings she had woken up in the rafter W and felt incrementally more real. She rode out the other side of town and turned toward home. Ethan was at the fence line when she came back up the lane doing something to a post that needed doing, and he heard her coming and looked up and squinted against the afternoon sun, and she could see the question on his face from 20 yards out. "You all right?" She stopped the horse beside him. "Someone in town said something," she said, "about your choice." He waited. "I told him she did not ask him." Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Good. That's all," she said. "That's all," he confirmed. "You handled it." She looked at him. This man who had never once tried to handle things for her had only ever stood beside her while she handled them herself, which was the thing she understood now she had needed more than anything. Not someone to fight her battles. Someone to be there while she fought them. "Yes," she said. "I did." She dismounted. He went back to the fence post. She tied her horse and took the supply package inside and put things away in the ordered kitchen that was hers, now fully, legally, permanently hers, and started coffee because it was that time of afternoon. She could hear him outside working. The sound of a hammer on a post. The sound of a man doing the daily necessary work of maintaining something worth keeping. She listened to it. She thought about what people in Red Hollow would say about them in the years to come. About the story that would be told the giant cowboy and the woman with the scar and what had happened when he chose her. She thought about how stories get simplified over time, how they get rounded off and made clean, the difficult middle parts smoothed out until all that's left is the shape of the thing rather than the texture of it. Let them simplify it, she thought. She knew the texture. She knew every difficult inch of it. The running, and the fear, and the legal papers on the kitchen table, and the night she had lain awake calculating how much longer she could survive. She knew the precise weight of what it cost to trust again after trust had been used against her. She knew what it felt like to face Robert Calloway in the yard without moving, and to walk into a courthouse knowing the outcome wasn't guaranteed, and to stand in a community hall and speak plainly to people who had treated her badly and ask them to be better. She knew all of it, and she knew this. The scar on her face had never been proof that she was broken. It had always been proof that she survived. It had always been exactly what she'd been told. It wasn't evidence not of weakness, but of the specific, stubborn strength it takes to keep going when everything is telling you to stop. Ethan came in from outside. He washed his hands. He poured himself coffee and stood at the kitchen window and drank it, looking out at the land that was theirs. And she stood at the counter and looked at his profile and thought, this is it. This is what it looks like. Not perfect. Not without difficulty or weather or the ordinary grinding friction of two people building a life inside the same four walls. Not a story where someone became perfect before they were loved. A story where someone was seen exactly as they were, scar and silence and 4 years of damage and all, and loved from that point forward. Not after they became worthy. Not after they proved themselves. From the exact point where they were, with everything still visible, nothing hidden, and nothing fixed. That was the whole story. That was the only story that mattered. She crossed to where he was standing and stood beside him at the window and looked out at the same land, the same spring sky coming in over Wyoming, the same world they were both in and had chosen. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. His hand found hers. She held on. And Amelia Carter, who had been called a beast by people who were afraid of what they didn't understand, who had spent 4 years running from a man who thought her silence could be made permanent, who had walked into a town's judgment, and a courtroom and a community hall, and a stranger's careless words, and had come through all of it, standing stood in the home she had made beside the man who had seen her first and best and without condition. And she was still. Not the stillness of hiding, not the stillness of waiting for something bad. The stillness of a woman who had finally arrived somewhere she intended to stay, and knew all the way down in the place where certainty lives when it's real, and not just hoped for, that this time nothing was going to make her leave. She was home, and she was never leaving again.